Hello everyone, this is Dalster and welcome to another episode of Dark Side of the Ring, Season 1, Episode 3. In this episode, it explains the tragic death of wrestler Bruiser Brody. When I was at The Undertaker's Dead Man show last April, he said that Brody met his demise in the showers. Brody's death remains a tragedy to this day, so I'll go over what this episode has so far. Brody's real name was Frank Goodish and was a huge star in the 1970s and 1980s. Before he wrestled, Frank was a football player at Washington for 3 years in the Redskins team. Frank was managed by Dutch Mantel, one of wrestling's greatest villains. They never wrestled in a match together though. Frank met his wife Barbara at a hotel in Australia. Barbara did not know that Frank was a wrestler called Bruiser Brody. They soon married in Las Vegas and have a son together named Jeff. Barbara said that Frank was able to separate his two personalities as he became a loving father for his son Jeff, and also portrayed himself as a frightening, insane character known as Bruiser Brody in the wrestling ring. Abdullah the Butcher, who I also did a video on last year, was Bruiser Brody's greatest nemesis, and Dutch said that Brody and Abdullah had the bloodiest and murderous matches. Brody and Abdullah would take their matches outside the ring sometimes, and the audience members would run away scared. Brody doesn't consider himself a wrestler, but rather a violent guy. In July of 1988, Frank left the US to go to Puerto Rico for a promotion, and sadly this would be the last time his family would see him alive. Puerto Rico at the time was known as Blood City. The promotion that Brody went to was called Caribbean Championship Wrestling, and the crowd was very violent as they wanted to see wrestlers in stretchers, as said by Abdullah the Butcher. The people would throw rocks, poop, and urine while the wrestlers were wrestling matches. Carlos Colon in the 80s was a huge promoter for the World Wrestling Council along with Gorilla Monsoon. Jose Huertas Gonzalez, known as Wrestler Invader No. 1, was Carlos's right-hand man and the booker for Carlos's promotion. Carlos wanted Jose to be a big star for the Puerto Rico promotion. Frank would end up wrestling Jose, but the two of them did not like one another. Brody would beat his opponents to death, but in his match with Gonzalez, it was more gruesome. He beat up Gonzalez so badly that he had to be taken to the hospital because Jose's face was so bloody and swollen. Tony Atlas said that Jose looked like a pumpkin. Another wrestler named SD Special Delivery Jones took Gonzalez to the hospital and told SD that he was going to kill Brody. A man named Victor Cununez was booking a deal with Brody on shares. Brody did this because he wanted to invest in Japan for a wrestling promotion. Brody, later in the mix, was owed $20,000 to $25,000, and he was serious about getting his money back. Brody also wanted to get rid of Gonzalez as well if he ever became the owner of Carlos's promotion. At the time in the 80s, Gonzalez's 3-year-old daughter just died of a drowning accident in a pool, so having his job being threatened was probably putting a lot of anger in him. Tony was ready and eager to tell his side of the story on what happened to Frank for this episode, as he said that he kept this story for years. He said that he saw Jose, Carlos, and Victor all huddled in a circle. Even Dutch said that he saw the three men talking. Gonzalez then got up and gave Tony a straight look as Tony was describing the events. Dutch felt like something wasn't right and wanted to get out of there. Brody then walks to Tony and was impressed by Tony's drawing, so he asked if Tony could draw a picture of his son. Tony then saw Gonzalez on one side where he had a towel in his hand. Gonzalez then asked Brody if he could have a talk with him, and this is where things take a turn for the worst. Before going to the shower room, Brody had a bag and a picture of his son. Tony said that he looked at Carlos and heard a loud choking sound from Brody. Tony then said in this episode that Jose's face was bloodshot red, and he had a knife in the air with Brody's blood. Tony said that the knife was so sharp that it cut Brody's ponytail off, as Brody was trying to get away from Jose. Carlos then came into the scene and kept Jose away from everyone else as he told everyone to stay back. Tony said that he felt Brody's intestines as he was holding Brody. Brody supposedly said to Tony to not let them hurt him anymore. Carlos then goes to Brody, but Tony stopped Carlos from getting any closer since he wanted to protect Brody as he had promised. Tony then told Carlos that he and Jose are responsible for stabbing Brody. Brody tugged Tony and told him that Carlos could come over to talk. When Dutch was heading toward the locker room, he said that he had a dark feeling. He saw Brody on the floor while Carlos was leaning over to him. Carlos asked Brody what he could do for him, and Brody said to take care of Brody's family. Dutch said that Brody told Carlos to tell his wife that he loves her. It was said in this episode that the showers where Brody's murder happened had a door, and the problem is that Invader never got out of the shower room for a couple of minutes. Tony said that he saw Jose get his keys and walked around Brody's feet and left as if he didn't notice how bloody Brody was. He said that the ambulance took 35 to 45 minutes since the traffic was pretty hectic during their wrestling event in order to get to the arena. Brody was a tall guy, so Tony helped lift him up in the gurney. Tony also stayed with Brody as they took him to the hospital. As they go to the hospital, Tony said that he cried and sang prayers as he was trying to have faith that Brody will be okay. Mick Foley, who was also narrating this episode, said that Tony was a true friend to Brody. Brody was at the hospital and stood there for 15 to 20 minutes waiting for a doctor. Tony went to a doctor who spoke little English, and the doctor told Tony that a stab in Puerto Rico was considered a cold, which probably means that it wasn't something so serious. The doctor walked away, and Tony said that he grabbed the doctor and brought him to Brody. Tony then saw Brody's feet, and they were blue. So he told the doctor to get help now. Abdullah was told that Brody got stabbed, and he thought it was a joke until the doctor told Abdullah that Brody did get hurt in fact. And so Abdullah took it seriously. The police walked in and they thought it was just a brawl, nothing serious. Back to Tony at the hospital, he said that the doctor told him that they were able to fix Brody's intestines, but that his liver got sliced. He said that the doctor told him to go home as Brody was stable. Dutch said that he saw Jose come back to the locker rooms as if nothing happened. Tony had returned to the dressing room and heard laughter. He said that Brody's blood was still on the floor and that the show was still going on. He got mad when the people were laughing, so Tony threw a chair in the room, and the policeman told him to calm down. The policeman told Tony that a fan stabbed Brody, but Tony told the police that it was actually Jose. Everyone in the room thought this was a scripted storyline, but Tony told some of the wrestlers that it was real, that Brody did get stabbed by Jose. Tony had a match with the Iron Sheik, which is why he came back. Sheik asked how Brody was while they were wrestling and that he heard a fan stabbed him. Tony told him that it was actually Jose, not a fan, and so Sheik went back to the dressing room angry as the two wrestled only for 2 minutes. Another wrestler named Sabio Vega tells Tony that he has his bag because people were looking for Tony, which meant that he couldn't go back to his room. Meanwhile, Dutch tells the hotel receptionist to send Brody's calls to his room. At the US, Barbara gets a lot of calls until she decides to pick up the phone as she was getting irritated. It was Nancy Colon, the wife of Carlos, and she tells Barbara to come to Puerto Rico because Brody got hurt. Barbara calls Dutch and asks him what happened, and he tells her that there was an accident. Dutch goes back to the receptionist and asks if she could call the hospital where Brody was staying, and she said yes. When she calls the hospital, the lady cries and tells Dutch that Brody died last night. Meanwhile, Tony had slept at the beach because he needed to be alone. He sees Abdullah after going back to the dressing room. Abdullah tells Tony that Brody died. Tony said that Abdullah told everyone that they were going to have a meeting. Abdullah denies that there was ever a meeting, but when asked that Abdullah said there wasn't one, Tony said that he is lying. Tony said that he remembers Dutch was there and that Dutch remembers there being a meeting. Abdullah said that he left the territory after Brody died. Tony was the last person to see Brody before his death. He tells the police what had happened to Brody, but the police said that everyone's story of the incident was different. Dutch said that he and the wrestlers were running the island now, not Carlos, in order to get justice for Brody. Tony also left the airport as the police did not have any more questions for him. Back to Barbara, she finally landed with her son Jeff, and as they're at the airport, she spots Abdullah. She tells Abdullah how Frank was doing, and he told her that Frank was gone. Barbara grabbed Abdullah and said, "Oh no." Tony said that Brody held on to his son's picture from the dressing room until his death at the hospital. Nancy took Barbara to the morgue and was able to see Frank's corpse. Brody died on July 16, 1988, and Barbara did a ceremony in Puerto Rico for him. Jeff said that his mom cried for hours. She said that she didn't know what to do with the corpse or how to arrange it. Barbara thought that she heard Frank's voice saying, "Barbara, you know what to do," and had his corpse cremated. Jeff picked his dad's casket, which was blue, and the ceremony had an open casket. Jose got arrested and was able to get out through bail by a businessman. Tony said that he was never contacted about the case since they had already proceeded with it. Dutch got a subpoena for a court appearance, but the paper was a couple days late. In an old clip from an interview, Carlos denies that there was ever a cover-up. He also said that he didn't see any stabbing. The police then let Jose go for self-defense. Apparently, Jose never testified, and the court found him not guilty because he told them that he acted out as self-defense. When Carlos was asked if it was self-defense, he said that he didn't want to talk about it anymore, but he had an irritated look from the interview that he did a long time ago. A month after Brody's passing, New Japan Pro Wrestling held a tribute show and invited Barbara and her son Jeff. From the clip of that tribute show, everyone in the crowd was chanting Brody, as Barbara closed her eyes and had a sad, grieving look. Mick Foley calls Bruiser Brody one of the best wrestlers in Japan wrestling and wanted to be like him. Tony shows us a good drawing of Bruiser Brody, and boy can that guy really draw. In some parts of this episode, we see Barbara and Jeff going through a storage unit and reminiscing on the memories they had of Frank through his belongings. Jeff said in this episode that he wants justice, but if he had personal justice, it would make it better. At the end of the episode, it shows that Carlos and Jose refused to comment or be interviewed. Since the episode aired, it was said that Jose still lived in Puerto Rico doing parties. We also see Abdullah watching old videos of Bruiser Brody as he cries, missing him. It was kind of a genuine reaction though, in my opinion. Interviewers for this episode are Dutch Mantell, Abdullah the Butcher, Mick Foley, Tony Atlas, Barbara Goodish, the wife of Brody and widow, Jeff Goodish, Frank's son, and David Manning, world-class championship wrestling booker and referee. A lot of wrestlers call Bruiser Brody's death a tragic loss. Brody Lee, who you guys might know as Luke Harper from WWE, was called Brody because of Bruiser Brody. Hulk Hogan allegedly said that he almost died when he went to Puerto Rico 4 months before Bruiser Brody died. This episode aired 3 or 4 years ago, and since then, Barbara went back to Puerto Rico and did a podcast interview for a show called La Vuelta, hosted by Dennis Rivera, the youngest brother of Savio Vega. Invader 1, or simply Jose, is still an important figure in Puerto Rico. Carlos Colon is retired, but his son Carlito is currently back in WWE. Tony admitted that he has a shoe fetish and appears on WWE Legends. Abdullah has a Dark Side of the Ring episode that came out last year in 2023, and surprisingly, that episode is my highest viewed video for the Dark Side of the Ring episode reviews. Although Abdullah is 83, he still wants to wrestle and has had some financial issues and other issues with another wrestler named Hannibal. From the look of things, I feel bad for the Goodish family as Brody's death never got the justice it deserved. In my opinion, I think that Jose did kill Brody and that Carlos might have known but could not stop Jose. Maybe Carlos was scared of him or something. Abdullah also didn't have much sympathy for Barbara, Brody's wife, at the airport and told her straight up that Brody died when she asked how he was. I actually do believe in Tony's story as he seems to be an honest guy while explaining what had happened and went into further detail. And the fact that Dutch was also a witness, they could use that for an example. But rest in peace to Bruiser Brody, aka Frank Goodish, and my condolences go out to his wife and son. I hope that Frank gets his justice for his murder. Anyway, what do you guys think of this episode? Did you guys like it, or do you think there's more to it than just murder? But thank you guys for watching, and thank you for your time, and take care of yourself and everyone around you, and I'll do the same too. But until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.